Emmy Vydner's life changed dramatically when she became a mother at the tender age of 14. Despite the fact that her mom, Gloria Vydner, took the news hard, she didn't turn her back on her daughter and continued to support her. However, no one could have imagined that an even greater tragedy would befall their family a couple years later. Emmy was born in 1973 into the Vydner family, where in addition to her, 3 other children were being raised: an older brother, John Paul, who had just turned 1 at the time, and 2 younger sisters, 1 and 4 years her junior, respectively. Gloria, the children's mother, had to be the sole breadwinner and caregiver for them, as she had long been divorced from her husband, who did not help raise their shared offspring in any way. The Vydner family lived in a small house of their own in the state of Indiana. Emmy was her mom's main helper. The girl cooked meals, cleaned, and looked after her little sisters. At the same time, she took her studies very seriously, dreaming of becoming a teacher in the future. Everyone who knew Emmy associated her with a cheerful, bright, outgoing girl whose smile was captivating. And then one day, when Emmy had just barely turned 14, she got pregnant. At first, she was afraid to confess this to her mother, so for about 5.5 months, she hid her condition, concealing her belly under loose clothing. None of her relatives even suspected she was pregnant. However, when almost half a year had passed, Emmy's rounded belly became so noticeable that it was no longer possible to keep it a secret. Then the girl mustered up the courage, went to her mother and, sobbing bitterly, told her the truth. Emmy admitted that she was very worried about the pregnancy, and through tears said, "Mom, I don't want you to hate me." Gloria, embracing her daughter, soothed her and assured her of her support, although deep down she felt confusion and despair. "I was shocked and simply couldn't believe it. It seemed to me that this was the worst thing that could happen in my life," the woman shared, recalling her emotions at the time. She had no idea that real grief was still ahead. As it turned out, the father of Emmy's child was 17-year-old Tony Abercrombie, a buddy of her older brother. The lovers met in secret, keeping their relationship hidden from relatives. Upon learning of her daughter's pregnancy, Gloria immediately forbade her from seeing Tony and set a strict condition, to completely break off relations with the father of the future child. News of young Emmy Vydner's pregnancy quickly spread throughout the district. Classmates, teachers, friends, neighbors, they all supported the girl and tried to help her in every way possible. Emmy was worried that she would have to miss school classes due to the approaching birth and that this would negatively affect her academic performance. Therefore, even while pregnant, she continued to go to school every day, and moreover, she arrived earlier than everyone else and diligently mastered new material. On October 25, 1987, Emmy Vydner gave birth to a girl, whom she named Emily. And just 6 days after giving birth, she returned to her school desk, albeit now in the status of a young mother. Realizing how important it was for her daughter to get a good education, Gloria helped her in every way possible, often staying with her little granddaughter. At the same time, the woman remembered that Emmy was still a teenager, so she did not forbid her from meeting with friends or going out. And the girl, despite her young maternal status, continued to be one of the best students in the school, earning teachers' approval for her diligence and hard work. Mother and daughter coped wonderfully with little Emily, taking turns caring for her. A year passed like this, then another. It seemed that life had returned to its usual course. Emmy had coped with the difficulties and was moving on. But one day, everything changed abruptly. The morning of November 13, 1989 began for 16-year-old Emmy Vydner with a severe sore throat. The girl told her mother that she would stay home with Emily and skip today's school classes. Gloria wanted to take her 2-year-old granddaughter to a nanny, but Emmy refused. After breakfast, each family member went about their business. Gloria went to work, while Emmy's brother and sisters went to school. Emmy and Emily were left home alone. Around 9:30, the worried mother called her daughter, but she didn't answer. When a couple hours later the calls again went unanswered, Gloria asked a neighbor to go and check if everything was okay. However, the woman returned empty-handed, no one opened the door at the Vydner's house, and inside there was complete silence. This alarmed Gloria, so she took time off work and rushed home. Opening the front door, the woman saw little Emily sitting alone on the stairs. Emmy did not respond to her mother's calls. Going up to the second floor, to her daughter's bedroom, Gloria froze in horror. Emmy, completely naked, was lying on the bed in a pool of blood, lifeless. Her mother immediately called 911. The police officers who arrived at the scene, during their inspection of the Vydner house, assumed that an attempted burglary had taken place here. The stereo system and graphic equalizer belonging to John Paul, Emmy's older brother, were missing. Emmy's own piggy bank with money had also disappeared from the girl's room, an ordinary glass jar in which Emmy had been saving about $50 for school needs. At the same time, no traces of the intruder's entry into the house were found. Most likely, he got inside either through the unlocked back door, or through the front entrance, where Emmy herself let him in. In the girl's room, criminologists found many pieces of material evidence left by the killer: semen on the bedding, a bloody handprint on the wall, and several hairs. The medical examiner established that Emmy Vydner was first hit on the head with a sharp object, then strangled. It's terrifying to imagine that little Emily could have been somewhere nearby at that time and witnessed this entire horror with her own eyes. Fortunately, the child was not touched. Law enforcement officers tried to talk to 2-year-old Emily, trying to find out at least some details of that fatal day from her. The little one ran from one wall to the other, repeating only one thing: her mother, as she called Emmy, was very angry that day. The police carefully collected all the potential evidence. They cut out a section of the wall with the killer's bloody handprint, and seized the victim's clothing and bedding. The investigation began with questioning the relatives, friends, and neighbors of the Vydner family. The victim's brother, 17-year-old John Paul, said during the interrogation that the investigators even tried to accuse him, but the young man had an ironclad alibi, and the physical evidence did not confirm his involvement in the crime. Emmy's ex-boyfriend, the father of little Emily, Tony Abercrombie, also fell under suspicion. However, during the interrogation, he confessed his sincere feelings for the girl and assured that he never wished her any harm. On the day of the tragedy, Tony was at work, which was confirmed by an indisputable alibi. The police's attention was also drawn to another friend of Emmy's, Troy Jackson, who lived near the Vydner's house. According to the cops, the guy allegedly knew the whereabouts of the equipment stolen on the day of the murder. However, during the interrogation, Troy denied any involvement in the crime. No traces of a struggle were found on his body, neither bruises nor scratches. Troy's hair, provided for examination, did not match the samples found at the crime scene. In addition, the guy successfully passed a lie detector test, so the suspicions against him were dropped. Investigators also interrogated other acquaintances of Emmy, classmates, neighbors. Fingerprints and hair samples were taken from each of them for analysis, but none of these people ever became a suspect. Soon, Emmy Vydner's funeral took place, which was attended by many local residents. The death of the young girl became an irreparable loss for the entire community. The detectives were also present at the funeral, closely observing each of the attendees. One of the most charming photos of Emmy, where she is smiling, in her favorite white turtleneck with a pattern, became her last lifetime portrait. It was in this outfit that the girl was buried. The grief-stricken mother, Gloria Vydner, hoped for a quick solving of the crime and severe punishment for the killer, but weeks and months passed, and there were still no suspects. After her daughter's death, Gloria officially adopted her granddaughter Emily and took on the role of her mother. The woman couldn't find peace. Thoughts of the uncaught criminal haunted her, because she trembled with horror that he might return and harm the rest of her children. From then on, Gloria did not leave her younger daughters alone. Her heart ached at the thought that the killer was still at large. She thought about moving to another house, away from the terrible memories, but the family's difficult financial situation did not allow it. It was an extremely difficult period for the Vydner family. Emmy's friends confessed that they begged their parents to board up the windows, fearing that the maniac could break into their homes in the same way as it happened with Emmy. Once, Gloria returned home from work and, knowing that her younger daughters should have already been home from school, entered the house. However, no one greeted her. Inside, there was an ominous silence, although the children's shoes were neatly standing in their usual place. Terrible thoughts flashed through Gloria's head, and she rushed to the second floor. The steps leading to the children's bedroom seemed endless. The woman hesitated for a moment in front of the door, but, grabbing the air, abruptly opened it. Fortunately, the girls were just sleeping peacefully. The years passed. Emily, Emmy's daughter, grew up. Fortunately, she did not remember the tragedy that happened to her biological mother. The girl did not recall either the police questioning or the moment when she was told about her mother's death. From time to time, detectives visited the Vydners, forcing them to relive the events of that fatal day over and over again. An exhausted Gloria admitted that at some point she got tired of it all, and she wanted only one thing: for them to finally leave her alone and let her live on, because Emmy would not return. In 2002, 13 years after the murder, a new lead suddenly appeared in the case. A 29-year-old man called the Indianapolis Police Department and told about his dream. In the dream, Emmy Vydner allegedly appeared to him and revealed the details of what had happened to her. Many of the details from his story coincided with what had previously been reported in the news. The cops carefully checked this man, and it turned out that at the time of the crime he was 16 years old and lived across the street from the Vydners' house. The fingerprints and DNA sample taken from him for analysis did not match, so he had to be released. Although the testimony did not play any role in the investigation, this call prompted the detectives to stir up the long-cold case again. That same year, 2002, investigators re-interrogated some of Emmy's inner circle, especially those who had had problems with the law in the 13 years since her death. However, the investigation again reached a dead end. In 2011, Emmy's friends created a Facebook group called Remembering Emmy Vydner. The detective who was assigned to investigate this old case was not very familiar with Facebook, so he asked a colleague, Bill Carter, to print out the group's page. Bill Carter became interested in this story, and although he had never investigated murders before, but only dealt with economic crimes, he decided to delve into Emmy's case. He became so engrossed in studying the materials of this old case in his free time that he could not tear himself away. Carter scrupulously studied every page of the case, every piece of physical evidence, information about school attendance on the day of the murder, and lists of those present at the girl's funeral. After entering all the data into an electronic database, he realized that the previous investigators had missed several leads. It turned out that there were several friends of Emmy's brother with whom the police had never even spoken and whose DNA samples were not checked. In 2011, Detective Bill Carter intensified his work on the Emmy Vydner murder case. He contacted the girl's family and her friends, questioning everyone who might have any information about the victim. Carter also began recollecting DNA samples from individuals whom the police had excluded from the circle of suspects at the initial stages of the investigation. Immediately after the crime in 1989, law enforcement officers carefully combed the entire area where the Vydners lived and still reside, writing down the names of all their neighbors. Armed with this data, Detective Carter set off along the same route to check if any of these people still lived at their old addresses. Carter was lucky to find one of the neighbors, a friend of Emmy's, who lived across the street from the house where the murder took place. The woman strained her memory, trying to recall the names of the guys Emmy was friends with. For the most part, she named names that were already known to the police and had been checked, but suddenly she remembered one that Carter had never heard of before: Ronnie Dean. In 2012, Detective Bill Carter, with the support of the Unsolved Crimes Unit, officially began working on the Emmy Vydner case. He considered it his duty to find this Ronnie Dean by any means necessary and either exclude him from the list of suspects or prove his guilt. It turned out that the Vydner family was well acquainted with Ronnie Dean. He was friends with John Paul, Emmy's older brother. The guys often hung out together, riding bicycles or going fishing. When Carter asked John Paul what Ronnie was like, he described him as an unsociable loner who always kept to himself. No one would have ever suspected him of anything bad. The detective paid a visit to the home of 40-year-old Ronnie Dean, which was located next door to the Vydner's house. There the man lived with his mother. Ronnie himself worked at an auto parts store. His marriage had long since broken up, and he actually did not participate in raising his already adult son. When Carter came to Dean's dwelling, his mother opened the door, informing him that her son was currently at work. The detective left the woman his business card, asking Ronnie to call him as soon as he returned home. And indeed, that same evening, Dean personally contacted Carter. The detective immediately suggested meeting and talking about the old case of the murder of young Emmy Vydner. Ronnie agreed and invited Carter to his home. But when the detective arrived at the scene, Ronnie was no longer there. Then Carter decided to check Dean through the DNA database, and found out that he had previously been held responsible for a beating in 1991 and theft in 1997. His fingerprints were stored in the database. Carter sent them for examination along with the cast of the bloody palm print found on the wall of the Vydner's house. This was supposed to be a routine procedure aimed at removing any suspicion from Dean. The results of the examination were stunning. Ronnie's fingerprints completely matched the palm print left at the crime scene. 23 years had passed, and now, finally, a real suspect appeared in the Emmy Vydner murder case. But the euphoria quickly turned to disappointment. It turned out that by that time, Dean had already disappeared, having stopped appearing at home. The police launched a massive manhunt for the fugitive. It soon became known that Ronnie had rented a car, using his credit card to do so. Fortunately, the car was equipped with the OnStar satellite tracking system, thanks to which the cops were able to track down Dean's whereabouts quite quickly. He was hiding at a friend's place in the same state of Indiana. When one day Ronnie was about to get into his rented car, police officers approached him. Noticing them, the agitated man pulled out a knife and began yelling, "I didn't do it." He managed to cut his wrist, and then rushed at the cops. They twisted his arm, using a taser, put handcuffs on him and took him to the hospital for medical assistance. Ronnie was interrogated in the hospital for 2 days. Everything took place under the sights of video cameras. Dean almost immediately confessed that he was to blame for the death of Emmy Vydner. According to him, he only wanted to rob a neighboring house and could not even imagine that Emmy would be at home and catch him red-handed. Ronnie had no idea that the girl had fallen ill and did not go to school on that fateful day. Dean said that he got into the Vydner's house through the unlocked back sliding doors. Going up to John Paul's room, he was going to steal a stereo system from there. It was at this moment that Emmy suddenly approached him. Frightened, Ronnie grabbed some object that was the first to come to hand and hit the girl on the head, and then killed her. For 2 days, Dean retold his story, constantly complaining that over the 23 years that had passed since then, his memories had faded and he poorly remembered the details. At some point, he even stated that he went to the Vydner's house not alone, but with an accomplice named Buck. However, Ronnie was unable to remember what he looked like or describe him in detail. According to his version, Buck remained outside and watched the house, and then went inside, and together they dealt with the girl. When investigators asked if he had seen little Emily, Dean replied that he had not noticed the child and had not even heard her crying. He had no idea that at that time, the little one was somewhere very close by. Throughout all these conversations with investigators and detectives, Ronnie behaved amazingly calmly and politely. He did not cry or shout. Despite what he had done, he did not look like a killer at all. Perhaps the time gap that had passed since then had an effect. Dean provided a sample of his DNA, which, not surprisingly, completely matched the traces of semen found in 1989 on Emmy Vydner's sheet and blanket. "I always tried to be a good person, but it seems that somewhere deep down, I'm not a good person at all," Ronnie confessed to the detectives. Both the bloody palm print and the genetic material belonged to him. No evidence was found that the crime was committed in complicity. The Vydner family, having learned the terrible truth about Emmy's killer, could not recover from the shock for a long time. It was difficult for them to believe that the quiet and unremarkable Ronnie was capable of such cruelty. After all, this guy grew up and studied side by side with John Paul, was his friend, and lived across the street from their home. He often visited them as a guest both before and after the tragedy, was present at Emmy's funeral, and mourned her death along with everyone else and supported Gloria. Later, Detective Carter found Dean's signature in the book of condolences at Emmy's funeral. But the fact that Ronnie's name had appeared in the case back in 2003 became known only during the re-examination of it. It was then that the girl's former lover and the father of little Emily, Tony Abercrombie, let slip that Dean often visited the Vydners. Carter suggested that in 1989, Ronnie simply went unnoticed. He was forgotten. For some reason no one ever interrogated him then. Researchers studying Dean's biography in 2012 came across another chilling fact from his life. It turned out that Ronnie's own son, Dylan Dean, was serving a sentence in prison for murder. In 2009, at the age of 16, he brutally beat his own mother, Mary Maginary, with a baseball bat. The woman died from her injuries. The boy claimed that she had mocked him, insulted him, and he could not stand it. Dylan had barely turned 17 when, a few days after the deed, he suffered the same fate as Ronnie once did. His father killed Emmy Vydner when he was 18. Both father and son committed high-profile crimes at practically the same age. The detectives were struck by this eerie discovery. Ironically, Ronnie had hardly participated in the boy's upbringing. He divorced Mary quite quickly, leaving her alone with the child. He only came to his son's trial and gave testimony. In 2009, Dylan agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He will be released in 2029, when he turns 37. But let's return to the Emmy Vydner case. For a long time, Ronnie Dean insisted that he had committed the crime not alone, but with an accomplice named Buck. And only in June 2013, just 10 days before the trial, 42-year-old Ronnie stated that he had killed Emmy on his own, without anyone's help. In the end, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. After the crime was solved in 2013, the Vydner family met with Detective Bill Carter to thank him for his brilliant work. It was he who was able to find out the killer's name just 12 days after taking on this case and bring the investigation to its logical conclusion. In memory of Emmy, 24 balloons were released into the sky, one for each year the family had lived without her. In January 2014, Detective Carter received an honorary award from the Indianapolis Police Department. He was offered a transfer to the Homicide Investigation Unit, but the man decided to stay in his current position. Emily Vydner grew up. She graduated from the same school as her mother Emmy, then received a university education. Aspiring to broaden her horizons and find more opportunities for self-realization, the girl moved from Indianapolis to California. Gloria Vydner, Emmy's mother, admitted that she still misses her daughter every day. She still lives in the house where the murder took place. Emmy's room still holds her photographs, and from time to time Gloria's grandchildren, who come to their grandmothers for the holidays, stay there. Then the cozy girl's room is again filled with children's laughter and bright smiles. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.